Welcome back to my kitchen. My name's Adrienne, and in today's video I'm sharing how I meal prep for the week. Today's prepping is mostly just restocking my fridge with things I like to have on hand. Biscuit mix, cooked bacon, some meat marinade, frozen cookie dough balls, sauerkraut, and shredded cheese. I want to make pizza for dinner tomorrow. I've been working on finding the perfect pizza dough recipe, and the last few times I've made pizza, I started the dough the day before by making a poolish. I'll never make pizza dough any other way. It's basically like a sourdough starter, but it's used with commercial yeast as opposed to wild yeast. I'll leave a link to the poolish, beef pot pie, and sauerkraut recipe down in the description. I'm starting this on the saute feature, which for my old pressure cooker, that is the brown rice setting. I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in there. I'm making a beef pot pie for dinner tonight, and since I'm making one, I'll just make two and freeze one for later. While the meat is cooking for that, I'll get some bread started. I'm making 4 loaves today. 3 of those will become French toast for the freezer later this week. I'm using 1 pound of beef stew meat, and because I'm going to be adding a lot of vegetables to this beef pot pie, I'm going to make 2 pot pies out of this 1 pound of meat. I'm going to add a little salt and pepper. When I store my pressure cooker, I leave this little I don't know what this is. Oh, the exhaust. This is the little exhaust cover. I leave that off, and I also leave the seal out so that it dries thoroughly and doesn't allow any weird smells to be trapped in there. While this is browning, I'm going to get the bacon in the oven. The oven is preheated to 400 degrees, and I'm going to check this bacon at 15 minutes. It usually takes between 15 and 18 minutes. All right, now that the meat has gotten a good brown to it, there's even some brown bits on the bottom of the pan, and that'll make a good broth. I'm adding some water to this. I'm going with 8 cups of water total because I want to use the broth that this is going to make the sauce for the pot pies. And now we're ready to get started on the bread. I'm going to do 2 batches of bread. Each batch makes 2 loaves. While we wait for that yeast to get foamy for our bread, I want to throw together the pork roast marinade. This is a Southwest marinade. I have the pork roast thawing in the refrigerator in the garage, and it's definitely still frozen. But what I think I'm gonna do is bring it in, take it out of its packaging, put it in a big Ziploc bag with this marinade, and it can thaw. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to do that because we're not going to eat this until Saturday. And if I put this marinade on that meat and keep it in the refrigerator for more than just a couple of days, it's actually going to start cooking the meat, and it could change the texture to make it a little weird, and I don't want to do that. All right, bacon looks great. Let's check on our bread. Okay, the yeast is nice and foamy. So what I'm gonna do now is get this first batch of bread going with all of the other ingredients. And once that is kneading, it will knead with my KitchenAid mixer for about 8 minutes, and I will get the second batch going. While the first batch of bread is kneading in the mixer, I'm going to get the bacon off of this tray and do a quick cleanup of the mess we've made so far. These are the 2 bowls I'm going to use for the first rise of our bread. I have some butter that I left out to soften on the counter for the cookie dough we're going to make. And I'm just going to pop this stick over here on this little plate so it's ready for our cookie dough when we make that. And I'm going to use this butter wrapper to grease the inside of these bowls so our bread dough doesn't stick. So here is our first batch of bread. And when I pull it out of the mixing bowl, it's a little stickier than it normally is, but it's gonna be fine. I like to just try to get it into a smooth ball before plopping it in the bowl. Measure the ingredients for my biscuit mix with my kitchen scale, and I'm sifting the flour and baking powder through this mesh strainer. I'm using einkorn flour this time, but I don't always use einkorn flour. If I have it, I do, but this recipe works really great with all-purpose flour also. Perfect. all that's left in my sifter now is the coarse salt that I used. And I like to do that because sometimes my flour can have some chunks in it, or the baking powder won't incorporate well, and you'll have pockets of bitter, dry flour or baking powder in the biscuits. Now that we have the dry ingredients mixed in, I'm going to add all of this cold cubed butter. To get some cookie dough made. I'm just going to do some chocolate chip, and I'm doing a double batch. I'm going to go ahead and plan on freezing the entire 2 batches of this chocolate chip cookie dough. And I just use the recipe that's on the bag. And I substitute half of the butter for oil. I keep marshmallows in my brown sugar to keep it from drying out. I need a cup and a half of brown sugar, and I'm just shy of that. So I'm just going to top it off with a little regular sugar. Save my little marshmallows. Forgot the eggs. We need 4 eggs. I like to freeze the cookie dough in scoops on the tray and then put the cookie dough balls in Ziploc bags once they're frozen and they won't stick together. This is a really small head of cabbage. And I'm just turning it into some sauerkraut. I'm saving this big leaf to put in the top of the jar. I'll show you that in a minute. Ended up shredding up to be a lot more than I thought it would. All we need to do now to turn this cabbage into sauerkraut is add 2 tablespoons of salt and pack it in a jar. I'm working the salt into the cabbage, and that's going to create its own brine that it will ferment in. And I'll leave this on the counter for about a week. And after a week, I'll replace the fermenting lid with a regular lid and put it in the fridge. I like to use these ball fermenting lids. It has this little air hole that is covered with some plastic, so it allows the gas to escape without letting anything fall into the jar. I've got a wide mouth quart mason jar. I'm packing this in really tightly because I don't want any air bubbles anywhere in the sauerkraut. And you can see that it's making its own brine in there already. And I'm packing it tight down in there because I want the brine to rise above the cabbage. So all of the cabbage is submerged in the brine. Now I'm going to take this clean leaf that I pulled off the outside of the cabbage, and I'm going to keep it as big as possible because my goal with it is to wedge it down into the jar to keep the cabbage submerged, all of our sauerkraut submerged. I ended up putting a couple of glass weights in with the sauerkraut just to be sure that all of that shredded cabbage will stay down underneath the brine. shredding 3 different kinds of cheeses here: mozzarella, Parmesan, and cheddar. I always start with the cheese that I don't want mixed because, you know, I'm not washing this in between each flavor. And I like my Parmesan to just be Parmesan. So I'm starting with that first. Then I'll move to the mozzarella, because if a little bit of Parmesan mixes with the mozzarella, not a big deal. And then I'll shred the cheddar last, because if a little bit of mozzarella gets into the cheddar, that's not a big deal either. Normally I only use my stoneware loaf pans when I bake bread, but if I'm making more than 2 loaves at a time, I pull out these glass loaf pans because it's all that I have. Because my stoneware is well seasoned, I don't need to grease these before baking bread, but I am going to grease the glass loaf pans before I put the bread in here. All right, let's make some poolish for tomorrow's pizza. Basically, you mix up the poolish, let it sit on the counter for 15 minutes, pop a lid on it for an hour at room temperature, and then put it in the fridge. It's good for 16 to 24 hours. After 24 hours, it starts to get a little bit weird, and I think it has something to do with the acid levels in the mixture. Anyway, it's delicious, and I'm really excited to share that with you today. I should have looked at the directions one last time before I got started with this, because I should have dissolved the yeast into the water with the honey and let that sit before adding the flour, but I don't think it's going to matter too much. I'm going to let this sit uncovered for 15 minutes, then I'm going to put the lid on it, let it set for another hour at room temperature, and then I'm going to put it in the fridge until tomorrow. All that's left now is to chop up the vegetables that I will need for the pot pies tonight. And I thought I had more vegetables in the refrigerator than I actually do. I planned on washing and chopping a bunch of vegetables to have them prepared and ready to cook with meals this week. I've got some Brussels sprouts that I can slice up, and since I made that bacon, I can easily throw together some Brussels sprouts hash this week. So I'll definitely do that and utilize those Brussels sprouts so they don't go to waste. I was hoping I had a few pounds of carrots to chop up, but it looks like I have just enough to shred some carrots for lunch wraps and to add to our pot pies, which is fine. I'd rather run out of vegetables and have to dive into my frozen inventory than to have vegetables go bad in the fridge that I didn't use. The liquid that came out of the pressure cooker is going to add some good flavor, but it's not going to be bold enough, I don't think, to carry this whole dish. I'm just going to add a little bit of beef base to this. Instead of topping this with a pie crust, I'm using drop biscuits. I'm making one of these into a freezer meal, and I am not going to put the biscuit mix on top of it now and freeze it. I'm going to wait until I pull it out to eat it, and I'll add the biscuits then. So checking out my list, the only thing that I didn't do that I planned on doing today was chopping up a bunch of vegetables that we could use throughout the week as side dishes to our dinners. The only thing I had was a bag of Brussels sprouts, and those ended up looking a little bit more rough than I had anticipated. So I'm tossing those out to the chickens, and luckily we have a freezer full of vegetables to help me round out the rest of this week's meals. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in my kitchen today. I look forward to seeing you again soon.